What if I told you some of your best clients are actually your least profitable? Not because they don't pay, not because they complain, but because of what they quietly cost you in delivery. Today, we're talking all about the hidden financial leaks in client delivery and why client relationships can become one of the most expensive parts of running an agency when you're not leading them well. So if you've ever had a client that looked great in revenue but felt expensive in every other way, this episode is for you. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Happy Clients Podcast, brought to you by Dot & Company. Whether you're a virtual assistant, an agency owner, or a client-facing account manager, we all deal with clients. Lucky for you, client management is what we do best. Now, let's dig in, chat cam life, and have some fun along the way. Cheers to happy clients.
E2M is a proud sponsor of the Happy Clients Podcast. If you're running a digital agency, you know the hardest part isn't getting clients. It's delivering consistently without burning out your team or hurting margins. E2M helps agencies scale confidently as a behind-the-scenes, white-label fulfillment partner. From web development and SEO to paid media, US-based content, e-commerce, and even AI, they plug into your agency so your clients get great results under your brand. No freelancers, no chaos, just reliable delivery that helps you keep clients happy and growing. Find out how E2M can support your agency at e2msolutions.com/dot. Well, welcome to the Happy Clients Podcast, Robert. Finally.
Great to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but a super important conversation that we need to have, because as we were preparing for our conversation, all the things that you were mentioning, I was like, oh my gosh, this has all happened to me. And I want every one of our listeners to hopefully skip some years and save a whole bunch of money by listening to this conversation. So I'm excited to dig in.
Likewise.
Amazing. So Robert, when you talk about client relationships and how they can often cost us more money than we probably even realize, what are some of those common leaks, we might say, in the delivery when we're actually working with clients that somebody listening should be looking out for?
One of the ones that's incredibly common and I don't think is recognized quite as much of how much impact it actually has financially is the slippage of timeline. So I've seen this. There's a specific example just earlier this year with a client where we were looking at the amount of workload that the team had, and they were almost fully resourced, like fully allocated across the entire team. But the work had already been invoiced, had already been recognized based on the current timeline, and there was over $1 million worth of work that had moved from Q4 2025 into Q1 2026. And the reality is that it actually ended up creating for $349,000 worth of net profit loss and an incredible financial burden to this agency. And the reality, looking at averages across all of my clients, that every single week that a project goes past the timeline, there's an average of 6% net profit drop.
And why is that?
So the reality is, it's like if you were to think about, I guess the easiest analogy of it is like, let's say that you have, you're selling lettuce. The head of lettuce on the shelf ends up going expired, right? So you can't sell that lettuce anymore. You end up having to get new lettuce to be able to sell it in the future, right? So that loss, that breakage is a problem. And the same thing's true for agency owners, is that if you have time that has already been pre-sold and a project ends up being moved from one week to the next because feedback didn't happen or a meeting got pushed or the plethora of different reasons that timelines end up getting pushed, unless you're able to sell additional hours for work that's happening tomorrow, which often doesn't happen, those hours are lost. You're still paying for the salaries for those team members. And so you not only have the cost of those salaries that is now adding on to that project, that theoretically you're on budget with the hours for that project, but you're still paying salary. So the throughput of it, the amount of revenue that you're able to recognize through the course of that project, ends up causing a massive net profit impact.
Crazy. Do agency owners even see that happening?
Unless you have, as I was sharing that example with that client, unless you have such a substantial amount that's happening in the upfront, no, you really don't see it. And it's just so rife in the industry, really, where you think that you're being a good client relationship person by not holding them to these timelines and not pushing on these types of things. But the reality is that it's just having such a negative impact to you, and it seems small, but it really isn't. Frankly, timeline needs to be as much of a forward-thinking component of how you're managing a project as the hours that go into the work that you're performing as well. One of the other things that I see happen, obviously, is scope creep is a huge component of it too. Just to put it into context, so let's say that you've got a 14-hour project, or 14-week project, I should say, and just 2 hours average per week that you're going over 30 hours of time. And this may only be, a couple of percentage of hours, and 30 hours over the course of a year doesn't seem that much or in a total project, but it's a 15% of profit loss that actually happens in that type of project as well. So you think that the number seems small, but when you get back down to the actual financial implication, it's huge. And the reality of this industry is that margins tend to be incredibly tight. The industry averages between 8 to 12%. And if you're talking 15% profit loss, it took a project from being profitable to being not profitable. If you are in that average of 8 to 12%, and then if every week, let's say that a project goes 2 weeks past due, past the original scope timeline, there's all of your profit. So now you're making no money. So you end up having some projects that are profitable if you're in that 8 to 12%, some projects that are profitable, but a lot of them that are not. And if you're able to fix these two components, there's others, but fix these two components, it has a huge implication to being able to hire people, to have the financial resources to do so, to being able to capitalize on opportunities that, come knocking at your door every single day. If you don't have the financial resources to capitalize on them, you end up losing out on that opportunity.
Yeah. And I think something that gets thrown around a lot in our industry is like scope creep is so bad and here's how you should avoid it. But we don't follow up with the why. And I love how you explain that to show, it's not just about the timelines getting pushed and not being able to take on more clients, but it's the nitty-gritty details that do matter, and they make a massive impact on the bottom line at the end of the day. And I think most people listening to this podcast are not looking at their numbers in this way. They're not digging into beyond the profit and loss, looking into things like timelines or, these tiny little slippages that create huge impacts in the run of a year.
I was just going to say, yeah, I tend to agree. And the reality is that it is a business, right? The objective of it is to make a profit. While it might be a passion of yours, it still should be profitable.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the early signs that a client that we're working with is becoming unprofitable, even if the revenue looks great on paper, this is a star client? What are some of those warning signs that me as an agency owner, I should be looking at?
First, let's define a bad or good client, right? I mean, I think that a good client is one that is respectful of you, respects the value that you provide, understands that you are in business and that it is supposed to be profitable, and they want it to be a mutually beneficial relationship. And to me, a bad client is one that isn't being respectful of your time, the inverse of it, right? It's not being respectful of your time. They're asking for additional things. They're trying to get as much out of you. They're trying to ink as much out of you as they possibly can. And so the clients that are pushing on more discounts, they're pushing on timeline, they're not being respectful of, hey, I'm asking for something that is due on Monday now, and I'm sending it to you at 5 p.m. on a Friday, which they know means that you're going to have to work over the weekend. Those are items that are really, huge indicators that this client is not being respectful of you. And while reality is that it very well could be a high revenue generating client, but the implication of these types of things from the discounts obviously have, far reaching implications profitability wise, but the respect of you as an individual, as a creative, as a service provider, how it ends up having an impact to your morale of how you end up being feeling in the work that you're doing. I mean, the reality is I'm sure this happens for many of you listening, is that you get an email from a client or a Slack message or whatever, and you see the name and you're like, oh. Mm-hmm. And if that's a feeling that you're getting, that means that there's something going on in the relationship that you should probably be taking stock of and actually looking at the relationship holistically, because that morale, I mean, the reality of this industry, right, is that we are selling our time, we're selling our expertise or our team's time as well, right? And if morale is down, that means that our service providers are not happy in what it is that they're doing. That means that the work that they're providing and the work that they're doing is not going to be as stellar as it can be, because they're not fully in it anymore. And that has reputational damage, that has the amount of impact that it's going to have to the client as well, so that then you're not able to have executive case studies. So it has just, aside from the financial implication, it has such a huge implication to the future prospect of the business as well.
That's an interesting way to think about it, because I think as an account manager, yes, we're feeling, is this a good client, a bad client? But generally the agency owner isn't thinking on that level. They're not thinking about the impacts of a negative client, we'll call them, on the bottom line. They're just like, on paper, this client looks great. We need to keep them around. Do whatever you can to keep them. But they don't look at the long-term effects of a bad client on the whole agency. So why does this happen? Because it happens to all of us in our agencies. Why are some of these clients great on paper and then end up being the most expensive ones to keep around?
Here's an example. I'll go through an example. So there was a client just out of New York City that had an anchor client at 80% of revenue roughly. And they had been working with them for a long time and had gotten those discounts. They were not being respectful of timeline, the morale of what was going on. The reality of what ended up going through this specific client and going through the hours, the amount that they were actually billing, what we ended up learning in the analysis of it is that for every single hour that they were working on this account, and 80% of their revenue, every single hour that they were working on their account, they were losing like $3 or $4 every hour. Net profit. And so it was an amassing problem. It was all the things that we were talking about, from the timeline slippage, the hours overage, it was the scope creep components, it was just one more little variation, one more revision, one more adjustment that was happening with each one of these different projects that they had. And so theoretically, because it is 80% of your business, you're thinking about it as like, this is a key milestone anchor client that we have to keep. And so what ends up happening, and the reality of this, is that the leverage piece for the agency ends up completely flipping, because it is an anchor client, and it doesn't have to be 80%. It could be even 20% or 30% of your revenue, right? And a lot of agencies have these anchor clients, and it ends up feeling like you have no option but to say yes. You have to say yes, because you think that the revenue, if you lose this revenue, then you're not going to be able to afford payroll, you're not going to be profitable, all of these implications. So you end up just saying yes because you feel like you have to, not because it's actually a pragmatic good decision to make. And so just the relationship polarity is off. And so it ends up becoming incredibly expensive to keep, because not only is it not profitable in this example, it's not always true that they're not profitable, but that dynamic isn't healthy. And so aside from the financial implications, and I do personally, yes, as a financial person, and have been a financial leader in agencies for most of my career, I think that the financial component of the business is incredibly important. But the reality is that also, just as a human being, and being married to a creative as well, like this has been something that you have fostered, and from a very young age, that you were the person that was drawing, doodling from when you were really young, and this is something that you've really enjoyed, and it is a passion of yours. It is a piece of you, of who you are as a person, and I respect that and see that. But just from a human basic level, I want to have fun with my life, you know, and if I'm not having fun, and I feel like I am being not even necessarily abused, because I may not be trying to do it intentionally, but I am no longer having fun because I'm reacting purely out of protectionism.
Absolutely.
And it ends up just not feeling good, and wouldn't even want the business anymore, you know?
Yeah. I think we've all gone through those like as you're talking about these examples, I'm thinking about these clients that I kept around for way too long. You know, they're toxic. They're even sometimes they don't even know it. And I see those emails come through and just my blood pressure goes up and I just come back to, I think it's that survival part of our brain that's like, well, I can't get rid of this client because then what if I can't, keep the business alive and then I can't feed my family and pay my mortgage. And it just happens without even knowing it's happening. But there's obviously some things that we can do as agency owners to put us in a better position so that we don't always have to keep negative clients around. I want to come back to the scope creep conversation because this is something we are always talking about as account managers. Make sure there's no scope creep. Make sure you're sticking to the outline. Make sure, sure, that's legit. But I think, like you always talk about, there's a difference between scope creep and expectation creep. So let's kind of dig into that a little bit. I want to hear your thoughts on the difference and how that might impact our margins at the end of the day.
So the distinction between the two, right? The scope creep component is actually asking for a additional deliverable, whereas expectation creep is that they believe this deliverable is meant to be included. And so there's a couple of pieces that end up playing into this, right? And frankly, and I mean this with all the love in the world, listeners, is that expectation creep is more the agency's fault and not necessarily the client's fault. They may have taken a liberal view to what was included in the scope, which I can't entirely blame them for. It's our responsibility to make sure that they are clear of what is included and isn't. And the reality is that we are operating under the assumption that when they sign an SOW, that they are going to remember what is included, all those different bullet points that we've listed, that they're going to remember what that actually was. And we do. But they've forgotten what timelines look like, what their responsibilities were, all those pieces that we've included. One of the key components that I see in so many SOWs that have come across my desk over the years is here's all the things that are included, but the things that we don't actually list often are the exclusions. So maybe, hey, we're not doing this implementation, we are not including this specific integration, we're not including this type of thing. Here's all the exclusions that are actually on this SOW as well, so that it's very clear of where the scope of work begins and ends. And if there are additional pieces they want this, they're going to have to pay for it. And the other piece is the reestablishment of that scope of work with the client on a regular basis. So one of the things, and you don't need to mention it, but what I like to do is include the actual SOW during the client meeting. So at the top of each one of your agendas, you just have, here's what the existing project that we're talking about, and just listing that SOW right at the top. So it's easy to reference, it's easy to be able to go back to, and it's just a copy and paste from your SOW with the client, allowing for you to be able to reaffirm that expectation. And the other piece that I see not happening incredibly well is that client onboarding. So the way that you start the relationship is so incredibly important, and I see it just being overlooked because we're trying to rush to getting to the work as quickly as possible, and we don't let the client know. I fundamentally believe that most humans are wanting to follow the rules. It's like conceptually, I go into a movie theater and I'm not gonna, pick up my cell phone, my phone rings. I'm not gonna pick up my phone and have a conversation in the middle of a movie while everyone else is enjoying the movie, right? That is a socially not accepted thing to do. And I know the rules when I'm in a movie theater. And the client having either have worked with an agency before or having not worked with an agency before, it is our responsibility to let them know the rules of what they're supposed to be and how they're supposed to be engaging with us. Where do they put feedback? How do they communicate with us? When are timelines? What are their responsibilities? All these pieces is our job as the expert to provide to them. They have hired us because they've hired you because you're the expert here. And if they knew all the different components of how this should actually play out, they wouldn't really need you. So it is your responsibility to make sure that they understand fully. And I said a lot of things in order to answer your question as a preface to it.
I love it. And I think most account managers, especially early on in your career, as you're learning these things as you go, you almost feel like you shouldn't be forward with things like the SOW or laying things out very clearly and reiterating every single time what is included, because you feel like you're being I don't know, naggy or something, that you feel like the client doesn't trust you, or I don't know, it feels icky. But as you grow in your career as an account manager, you realize that it's only going to benefit them at the end of the day if you can be forward and reiterate and just show that this is what we're working on together. You know, we're not hiding anything. And I think just gives you that confidence and that maturity in that relationship to build a stronger foundation with that client. And I think the way that you just explained that, you know, the movie theater analogy, we're all like, yep, I get that. Yeah, I'm not answering my phone in the movie theater. So that's really, really helpful. Robert, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of these profit leaks. You know, I love talking about all these financial elements because I've been doing this for 7 years and I've talked to a lot of accountants and financial people within the agency space, but no one really explains it like this in a way that just makes sense from an owner's perspective of day to day, like things that I should be looking at beyond just my numbers. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these sneaky profit leaks, we'll call them. Things like you mentioned earlier, like approvals and how quickly clients are getting back to you. But can you kind of talk a little bit about some of these behaviors from our clients or even our team members that might be costing us a lot of money?
So I'm just theoretically, right? And I mean, to me, the way that I look at numbers, right? The numbers are the output of the activity that's been happening in the business, right? So your financial statement is all the activity that has happened. And to me, the way that I want to look at everything, and to now looking at an agency's financial statement, I'm able to, like, within benchmarks and looking at the numbers, I'm able to say, all right, here's like 4 or 5 problems that I see within the financial, and then here's the potential symptoms. So like the reasons why. So here's the symptom, the financial, and here's all the activities that potentially can lead up to this. And to everyone listening, that's how I want you to be thinking about your numbers as well, is here's what the output was and what are all the things that led into this. So there's loads of different things, but one of the ones that I see happening that has the farthest reaching implication is how we engage with the client and lead the client. There's the core of everything that every single client is coming to us for is that they're looking to mitigate risk. They're looking to make sure that they have the outcome, the business impact that we are having. And the biggest piece, and I'm again doing a lot of preface to answer your question, the biggest piece that they want is to make sure that they're going to get to the outcome. But what I see happen a lot is when we are not being forward and we are taking this more passive approach to the relationship, we are not leading them and we're not being strategy forward in the relationship. So what it ends up doing is it ends up creating for the client to have an anxious relationship with the agency. And naturally, because they don't see someone leading this conversation and actually guiding this project forward as much as they should be. And so they end up micromanaging it. So they end up handling the timeline pieces. They end up trying to guide the creative more than they should. They end up trying to push the work in a different way or having an opinion on a color that they shouldn't have had an opinion on because you have the research that allows for you to have made those choices. And the amount of times in the presentation, and I'll explain one specific component and then how that has the trailing financial implication, is the amount of times I've seen strategy or creative being presented to a client and just showing them the art and asking the client what they think. And I just like immediately like head to the desk of just, why are we doing it that way? The reality of how much work you've put into it. And there needs to be like phases into describing this to the client of what was the outcome that you're looking for to begin with. So like just putting context around what it is that we're doing. So here's the objective that we are looking to do. Here's all of the assumptions or the information that we are relying upon to make the decisions that we are making. Here's where we are in the process of delivering this creative. So maybe this is design review 1, or maybe this is the wireframe phase of it. This is the things that we are going to be needing right now. Here's why we made the choices that we did. So we thought about this, we considered this, we took your feedback here, we managed this component of it before actually showing them the thing that you're looking feedback for. So that is really truly guiding the client so that they're clear of where they should be providing feedback, when they should be, what should the output actually be for them. And if they end up trying to control the conversation or trying to control the actual project. It ends up in more revisions. It ends up in the team spinning their wheels more, which ends up meaning that the timeline is going to go over. It means that we're going to go over budget on hours. There was a client out of Los Angeles that's still a client today, that when we first were working together, their average amount of revisions that they had in the brand work that they were doing was 8.
Yikes.
Yeah.
My brain goes to 8 weeks every time, you know?
I think it was more than that, right? Because like some of these were like big brand guides. We ended up implementing what I was just describing, and there's more detail to it, but implementing what I was just describing, and they went from 8 to none.
What?
Because what people want, again, is they want to know that someone else has this. Like, I'm a control freak, recovering
Same.
control freak.
Maybe that's why we get along so well.
And the reality is what I want more than anything, and why I end up being the control freak, is I want the outcome to come to fruition. I want that thing to happen the way that I wanted it to. But if I feel like someone else has it, then I'm going to exit. I don't feel like I need to micromanage it. I don't even want to be in control. I'm asserting that control because of my anxious nature.
Yeah.
And speaking as that person that is that control freak, that has that anxious nature, I know that I want my service provider, my advisor, whomever, to have greater control over the work that they are doing. So I don't feel, and that's true for my team too, that I don't feel like I have to be there. Because if I don't, then I don't have to worry about it, and then I don't have the anxiety around it. And then the more that I am, and frankly, the amount of times that my team, and I'll talk about my team specifically, the amount of times I put my head somewhere that it didn't belong, I've actually made it worse almost every single time. And the same is true with your clients, is that if you're allowing for them to exert control because of an anxiety that they have, because you haven't managed this scope of work or the way that we were presenting, the way that we were managing the account, we are creating for that time slippage, the timeline slippage, the overage in hours, the amount of revisions, the extra work, the make goods that are now necessary to make the client feel better because we didn't do something that we were supposed to have done. And that has, every single one of those has a financial implication.
Right. So what's one thing you would tell an agency owner or an account manager listening that maybe they're in that position where it's, 8, 10, 12 revisions and they want to get it down to a minimum? What's the one thing they can do?
Explain your rationale better. The reality for me is, and for every single one of us that are listening or in the room right now, is that we are experts in our own right. And because of that, we end up looking at some of the things that we are explaining as if they're like the back of our hands, Right. And they don't really need explanation because it's just so obvious to us that this is the reason why we've done it. But now we're assuming that the client has the same level of understanding, and they don't, and they probably shouldn't, because otherwise they would be doing the work themselves or would be doing it and managing it internally. They wouldn't need us. And we need to explain more of our thinking, that rationale that we have, because if we explain the rationale, even from a timeline perspective of why do we need, in order to have this project done on timeline, of the timeline that we've outlined, why do we need feedback in the timeline that we do? Because it allows for us to actually have the launch prepared for July 1st and this product launch that you have. And if we don't, then it's going to push the timeline, and then it's going to have an implication to this launch, and it's not going to be as good as you would want it to be. And so it's not going to be as effective, and it's going to impact the outcome. And so those rationale pieces of why we've done what we've done, there's a reason why we've done it. And if they don't understand it, then it's very difficult to try to get them to engage with it in the right way, Right.
Interesting. And I think, for me as an account manager, I always put myself back in those shoes. I think what the client really needs, sometimes we come up with things in our head. We're like, oh, I need to show up as this person who knows exactly what they need and present the options exactly this way. But really, at the end of the day, they just want me to come in confident and talk to them on their level and not make them feel stupid and make them feel like we're a partner. And if you can do that, then that trust is just it's quick. It comes so naturally, And so I think as an account manager, just thinking about what you just said and reframing how you approach those client conversations it changes everything. And we're often not thinking about the bottom line in those moments, but it really, really does make a big impact. And so I think it gave me just this sense of a refresh in my mind. So thank you for that, Robert.
Of course.
Something that, I love how you take numbers and reframe them. And I'm just thinking about all these examples of what you gave me during our conversation. But sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. It's like we are in the day-to-day and we're doing the client work and we're doing the sales and the strategy and all these things, but we may not be taking a step back, and we don't have the experience that you have in the financials to say, here's exactly what I need to do on a weekly, monthly basis to know that I'm on track. So from your perspective, if I'm an agency owner or an account manager, what are some of these things that I could be tracking weekly in a simple way so that I don't make any of these mistakes in the long run?
So I would love to be able to give you a very simple answer to this, but there really isn't one. The way that I like to approach any number, and there's at each different phase of an agency's growth, there's different things you need to be tracking, but core to what I would say is that you should be focusing on maybe 3 key numbers within what your own activity is, maybe 5 at the most. What I see happen is people either tracking nothing or they're tracking too many things, and ultimately nothing is actually truly important. The reality of the world is, to me, is what is the actual number one issue that I have in the business today? Is it that revenue is not growing? Is it that our expenses are too high? Is it that we are not profitable enough? Is it that we are not converting enough? Like, what exactly is the biggest problem that we have? And then track that specific metric of what exactly goes into that, and then understanding what are all the activities that then feed into that specific number. So to me, the thing that's most important is what is the thing that I am focused on in the business today? What is the number one thing that I need to be having an impact on today? Whether that's the account manager function or the CEO or the salesperson, it's across the entirety of the agency, is what is the number one thing that I need to be focusing on today in order for us to achieve our midterm goals over the course of the next year, let's say. And then if you have that number in front of you on a regular basis of, I just want to see improvement on how that's actually going, of like, what exactly is the activity that I'm doing that allows for that to improve? It's just what is the core problem I'm looking to solve? And so if it is, let's say, that we are looking at that we need to be able to maintain one of the core problems, and on our podcast, we were recently talking about how so many agencies are so entirely focused on new logos and new revenue generation versus actually what is more core to growth, client retention, and being able to sell to your existing book of business. And so it may be, what is the number of projects over an 8-week period of time that actually result in another project? Mm-hmm. So what percentage is that? For an account manager, that is a core thing that you should be looking at. Of what exactly is that turnover, that gross revenue retention that you ultimately have in the business? And looking at that allows for you to understand, all right, so this is actually, I'm able to, maybe I've added an extra strategy meeting to these scopes of work that allows for me to be able to give client what is going to be the next thing that they're going to need to work on, and how can they achieve their goals, and what could we be doing to help make that better, faster, what have you. Mm-hmm. And did that actually have an impact? So I've implemented it, and then over the course of the next couple of months, did that actually improve the uptick of the amount of projects that was able to be derived from it? Yes or no? And no, then okay, what do I need to do differently in order to allow for that to happen? Yes, cool, that's great, let's keep it going. I feel like the modern world, vis-a-vis a lot of social media, I think as an implication of it, is that we are looking at, this person had X, Y, and Z success, this person is doing A, B, C, and I should be doing that, I need to be better like them, I need to be this. And the reality of the world is the only thing that really truly matters to every single one of you is you just need to be better than you were yesterday. That's it. And how do I make an impact to what it is that I'm doing today versus what I did yesterday so that I can have a better tomorrow? Mm-hmm. And forget the rest. Like, sure, there's loads of useful information online that can help you with those ideas and evaluating them. But the thing is what is the problem that I need to solve for? What is the most important thing? And let me turn down the volume of everything else. and focus on making that refinement so that I can make it work and then I can move on to the next.
Oh, that's deep. I love it. So as an agency owner listening, as we're kind of wrapping up this conversation, if you could have a magic wand and give that agency owner a win by the end of the year, when it comes to this delivery and client relationships financial conversation that we just had, what would it be?
Own your expertise. People hire you because they aspire to having something that you already have, that you innately already are just gifted at. And you need to be that meaningful guiding force, that whether that is in your marketing activity or in the way that you're leading an account or the way that you're selling, is that the more that you're able to actually own that expertise, the more that you're going to show up confidently, the more that you're going to be able to have that client feel secure in the direction. And no one wants to enter into a room, shouldn't want to enter into a room at least, thinking that they should be the smartest person, the best adept at it, and the most important person there. Is that you should be that person for that specific right. They are in their own right, but in that specific area that they are in. And you're incredible at what you do, and you provide an incredible amount of value to your clients. Own it.
Amazing. Well, Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone listening did too. But where can people learn more about what you're up to? Because I know you have so many amazing things that you help agency owners with beyond just a lot of these operational improvements. But where can people learn more about you, Robert?
Yeah, you can go to creativeagencysuccess.com/happy clients. And on that page, there's actually 3 things that you can do. There's a guide on delivering amazing results for clients, just a step-by-step process that you can utilize there, a copy of my book, The Practical Agency. And if you're looking to make some specific changes and have specific questions about your agency, there's an opportunity to book a call, and happy to have a chat with you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Robert. For anyone who tuned in, please check the show notes. We will link everything below. But thank you so much for coming to another episode of the Happy Clients Podcast.
Cheers to happy clients.